The tremor hit first, a subtle shiver that ran through Cradle Station's metallic bones. The hum of the station's heart faltered, and the lights flickered. Sarah Quinn's fingers tightened on the control panel. This wasn't a glitch. This was real. "Commander, we've got a breach in Sector 4. A voice crackled through her comm, a soldier's voice, one of the younger recruits. It wasn't panic she heard, but urgency. She could almost see him, a kid who never thought he'd be in the middle of a war that wasn't his choice to fight. "Not now," Sarah muttered under her breath, pushing through the corridors of the station, her boots echoing on the metal floors. There wasn't time for a full briefing. There wasn't time for anything. The station had been breached, and there was a traitor on board. She could feel it. Someone had let the Xal'gar in. The bright blue lights overhead were meant to inspire calm. But as Sarah moved through the chaos, they only made her feel trapped. The station had been quiet for weeks, quiet in a way that made her skin itch, like the calm before the storm. The silence was never comforting. It meant they were waiting. Waiting for someone to make a move. And someone had. Another tremor rolled through, stronger this time, followed by a distant explosion that rattled the walls. "Where's the damn backup?" Sarah barked into her comm as she turned a corner, her pulse quickening. "Backup's on the way, Commander. They're coming through the lower levels," came the reply. But she didn't trust it. She never did. She rounded the final corner to the control room, a tactical hub that would have been the first line of defense against a full assault. But now, it was chaos. Sparks flew from an overhead console, and a young lieutenant was crouched beside it, trying to reroute power. "Lieutenant!" Sarah snapped. He straightened up at the sound of her voice, the relief visible on his face. "Commander, I can't get the system back online. The control panels, something's jammed. It's like someone knows exactly where to hit." She stepped up, her mind racing. The station was built with redundancies, layers of protection designed to handle an attack like this. Someone on the inside had to have known exactly what to target. "Who's on duty in Sector 4? She asked, trying to stay calm, though every fiber of her being screamed at her to act. The traitor had to be one of their own. "Staff Sergeant Darnell and his team, Commander. They're at the north checkpoint." She didn't need to ask more questions. Darnell had been with her for over a year. He was as loyal as they came, at least, that's what she thought. "Get this room back online, Lieutenant. I'll head to Sector 4. Stay on comms with me." She didn't wait for a reply, pushing past him as she rushed down the hallway. Her boots pounded against the metal floor, and every step felt heavier than the last. The walls, once a constant companion in this ghost of a station, now felt oppressive, suffocating. Someone was betraying them. She could feel it in her gut. As she approached the access door to Sector 4, she slowed her pace. The usual security drones that patrolled this area were absent. No guards, no usual protocol. Just an eerie silence. "Darnell," she called softly into her comm. "Answer me." Static. Then the crackle of something, a voice, muffled. It didn't sound like Darnell. "Sergeant?" Her voice was harder now, authority pushing through the tension. Still, nothing. The door slid open with a faint hiss, revealing a long corridor lit only by emergency red lighting. It was silent. Too silent. She moved cautiously, hand hovering over the sidearm at her hip, every sense heightened. The air felt thick with dust, a quiet reminder of how long it had been since anything resembling peace had settled over Cradle Station. The first body came into view, one of Darnell's men, slumped against the wall, lifeless. His eyes were wide with shock, his fingers still wrapped around his weapon, but his body had been brutally twisted, almost as if the life had been squeezed out of him. Sarah's stomach turned, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. There was no time for mourning. Not yet. "Sergeant!" she shouted, her voice bouncing off the walls. Still, no reply. She pushed forward. It didn't take long for the next discovery to make her blood run cold. The hallway opened into a larger section of the station, and in the center stood a single figure, back to her. A man. Not Darnell. Turn around now, Sarah ordered, raising her weapon. The figure didn't move. Her finger itched at the trigger, but she didn't fire. Not yet. The man finally turned. And then her heart stopped. It was Darnell. Or at least it had been. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, and the uniform that had once been pristine now hung off his frame like a rag. His chest had been ripped open, the wound gaping, but his expression, his eyes, said everything she needed to know. Darnell was dead. But something else wore his skin. You! Sarah's voice faltered as she took a step back. Her mind raced, trying to piece it all together. The sabotage. The betrayal. The Xal'gar had a way of corrupting their enemies, of turning them into something else entirely. But this was different. There was something more here, something even darker. The thing that wore Darnell's face tilted its head slightly, an unsettling grin spreading across its features. You're too late, Commander. The station's ours. Your resistance, all of it, belongs to the Xal'gar now. The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She'd been betrayed by someone close to her, a soldier she'd trusted with her life. Her fists clenched as rage flared inside her. You'll die for this, she growled. She didn't wait for it to speak again. The gunshot was the only response it would get. The silence that followed was deafening. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to undo the damage. Hashtag cliffhanger ending asterisk. The calm crackled again. Commander Quinn. It was the lieutenant. His voice was panicked. The traitor's code just activated. Our systems are gone. The Xal'gar fleet's already here. Sarah's heart sank. This was just the beginning. The station had gone dark. Sarah Quinn stood in the flickering emergency light of the command center, staring at the empty screens. The control systems were down. The navigation, communications, everything, compromised. Only the faint hum of emergency power kept the station from going silent, a hollow reminder of their desperation. Commander. The voice of Lieutenant Calder broke through the tension. He was the last of the tech team, his face lit by the soft glow of a malfunctioning console. I've managed to restore some systems. But the shipyards, they're all locked down. We can't get any of the fleets operational. She didn't respond at first. Her mind was elsewhere. Darnell's betrayal still lingered like a weight on her chest. He was a dead man walking, literally. A puppet of the Xal'gar, just as the station was now. They were done. The sabotage, the dead soldiers, the corrupted systems, it was all part of a bigger plan. A plan she was too late to stop. We can't just sit here and wait to die, Sarah finally said, voice low but firm. Her hand gripped the railing, knuckles white. There's more, Calder said, his voice wavering. I found something, a message. It was buried in the station's backup logs. From Darnell himself. Sarah turned sharply. What? What did it say? Calder hesitated, pulling up the message on his screen. The words that appeared were chilling. Asterisk. You were never supposed to know, Commander. This station was a trap from the start. The Xal'gar, they'd been here longer than you think. The war, it was never just about Earth. It was about us. All of us. Now it's too late. I've made my choice. Asterisk. The message ended abruptly. Sarah's stomach churned. It was more than a warning. It was a final confession. God damn it, Sarah muttered, slamming her fist against the console. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts as the weight of the betrayal hit her. How could I have missed this? How long has it been? Calder stepped back, watching her carefully. A year, Commander. The Xal'gar have been inside for at least that long, spreading their influence. She ran her fingers through her hair, her mind racing. We need to make contact with the fleet, Calder. If we don't... A loud crash from down the corridor cut her off. Her head snapped in the direction of the sound. The whole station trembled again, more violently this time, the emergency lights flickering rapidly. They're here, Sarah said, more to herself than anyone else. Commander, the station's core is compromised. Calder added, his voice tight. The Xal'gar, they're taking control of everything. They've got us trapped. Then we'll make our stand here. We fight. Now. Sarah's voice was steel, her mind already moving to the next step. She couldn't afford to waste time. The resistance needed every moment they had left. She pulled out her sidearm, feeling the weight of it in her hand. It had been a long time since she'd had to rely on such basics: gunfire, ambushes, and hand-to-hand combat, but that's where they were now. In the trenches. On their own. We've got a small window before the Xal'gar break through, she said, her gaze hardening. Calder, can you get us a signal to the fleet? Maybe get something to override their systems? I'll try, Commander, but it's a long shot. Their security is too tight. But I'll give you what I can. Good. I'll deal with the rest, Sarah said, already turning to leave. The hallways of Cradle Station were silent, except for the distant hum of alien technology infiltrating the very walls. Her footsteps echoed against the cold metal floors as she moved deeper into the station, her eyes scanning every shadow. This place had been her sanctuary, the heart of humanity's last hope, but now it felt like a tomb. She entered the tactical briefing room, the walls filled with tactical displays, each one showing a different section of the station's layout. It was supposed to be a war room, the final bastion of human strategy. But it was empty now. Abandoned. Sarah slapped a control panel, bringing up the fleet status report. The Xal'gar's advance was relentless. She could see it in the data, hundreds of ships moving toward Cradle Station, swarming like locusts. Their warships were massive, their tactics brutal. And they were winning. I'll be damned if this is how it ends, she muttered to herself. She grabbed a comm link from the table and dialed into the remaining resistance forces on the station. The message was simple. Prepare for the worst. We fight. Now. It was a call to arms, but also a reminder of what was at stake, not just their survival, but humanity's place in the galaxy. As Sarah moved through the station, gathering the last of the troops, her thoughts shifted to the traitor, Darnell. His face, the way he'd smiled before he died, haunted her. Was he under the Xal'gar's control from the start, or had they turned him into a monster? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden blare of alarms, followed by a guttural, mechanical roar that echoed through the station. They're here, Sarah said, teeth gritted. The first wave of Xal'gar invaders burst into the corridor, their sleek, black exosuits glinting under the emergency lights. They moved in perfect unison, lethal and precise. Sarah didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, raising her weapon. Everyone, get to cover! She shouted. The resistance soldiers scattered, moving into position, their weapons aimed at the enemy. The Xal'gar advanced relentlessly, but they didn't expect the resistance to fight back like this. Humanity had always been underestimated. They relied on their strength, their numbers, and their superior tactics. But above all, they relied on their sheer will to survive. Open fire! Sarah yelled, and the corridor erupted into chaos. The first Xal'gar fell, a blast tearing through its chest, but the others didn't stop. They advanced with brutal speed, weapons drawn. Sarah fired again, each shot landing with precision, taking down another invader. Her heart raced, adrenaline flooding her system, but she kept her focus sharp. Fall back! She commanded as the pressure from the Xal'gar forces intensified. They were pushing, relentless, but so were the humans. The resistance soldiers took up positions along the walls, retreating in calculated steps to the next line of defense. Sarah watched them, impressed by their resolve. They were far from perfect, but they were fighters. The best the galaxy had left. Calder! She shouted into her comm. What's the status on that fleet signal? Getting closer, Commander, he replied, his voice strained. But it's going to take a minute. Minutes. They didn't have minutes. As the Xal'gar closed in, Sarah knew this would be the true test. If they couldn't hold them here, Cradle Station, and humanity's last hope, would fall. #cliffhanger ending asterisk. Just as Sarah's squad regrouped, a deep, rumbling sound reverberated through the station. The Xal'gar weren't just advancing, they were deploying something bigger. "Commander, we've got a larger ship coming in from the outer rim," Calder said urgently. "It's massive. It's not just an invasion. It's a full-scale assault." Her heart skipped. "We won't survive that." "Not unless they made a stand that would shake the galaxy." The sound of metal twisting and groaning under pressure filled the air, and the station's shaking intensified. Sarah Quinn's pulse was steady, but her mind raced. The Xal'gar had breached the last line of defense. Cradle Station was on the verge of collapse. "Commander, the large ship is in range. It's preparing to deploy ground forces." Calder's voice crackled through the comm link, urgent and tight with strain. Sarah didn't need the confirmation. She could hear the thundering echoes of Xal'gar boots in the hallways, their unnatural, synchronized movement cutting through the atmosphere like a tidal wave. It was only a matter of time before they would be on her, and they wouldn't stop. "Lock down the station's core now," Sarah barked as she moved quickly toward the command bridge, where the resistance soldiers had begun to regroup. Their numbers were thin, too thin. Every face was marked by the horrors they had witnessed, but there was something else behind their eyes: resolve. "Sir, the docking bay's compromised," one of her men, Sergeant Hayes, called from a control panel as she entered. "We're stuck here. Our only chance is to hold them off long enough for Calder to get that signal out. If he can't, we're done for." "Then he will get it out," Sarah said, voice sharp and unwavering. "He has no other choice." She moved to the map table, where a holographic display of Cradle Station's layout flickered. The Xal'gar invaders were everywhere. Hundreds, no, thousands had infiltrated the station, and it was impossible to predict where they would strike next. "Hayes, take your team to the western corridor," Sarah ordered. "That's where they're pushing hardest. I want every gun available there, every trap laid. Make them bleed for every inch." "Understood," Hayes replied, already moving to assemble his squad. Sarah turned back to the table. She could feel the weight of the station pressing down on her chest, the walls closing in. Every movement she made, every decision felt like it could be their last. They couldn't let the Xal'gar breach the core. Not now. Not when they were this close to a potential counterstrike. "Calder, talk to me," Sarah said into her comm, her voice cool despite the firestorm unfolding around her. "I'm pushing the override, but the Xal'gar security's got deep roots. I've bypassed the first 3 layers, but I can't promise I'll break through the 4th in time." Calder's voice was thick with tension, but she could hear the steady click of his keyboard in the background. He was doing everything he could. Sarah exhaled, glancing at the soldiers gearing up for their final stand. The Xal'gar were closing in, but they were still just a few steps away from cutting the station's power entirely. If they couldn't hold the station's vital systems long enough for Calder to finish the override, it was over. "Do you need more time?" she asked. "I need." Calder's voice was cut off by a blaring siren, the station's emergency lights flashing as the inner walls of the command center began to hum and whine. The lights died again for a split second, plunging them into darkness. Then they flickered back to life. The sound of an explosion rumbled from the docking bay. The Xal'gar had breached the final security doors. "Sarah, I don't think we can wait any longer. They're almost here." Hayes's voice was tense through the comms. "I know. Hold your position," she snapped, her mind already calculating. The resistance was outnumbered. The Xal'gar were relentless. But there was one thing humanity had over them: adaptability. And Sarah Quinn was determined to use every scrap of that advantage. A new sound reached her ears, a slow, rhythmic thud that vibrated through the walls. It was mechanical, deliberate, and it sent a chill through her spine. Something massive was moving toward them. Something larger than anything they'd seen before. "What is that?" Sergeant Hayes asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not sure, but I'm about to find out," Sarah muttered. She turned and ran for the door, her boots thudding against the metal floor. As she neared the main hallway, the source of the sound became clear: a massive Xal'gar war machine, crawling down the corridor, its dark, alien exoskeleton gleaming under the emergency lights. The thing was built like a tank, large enough to crush anything in its path. "They've brought out the big guns," Sarah muttered to herself, drawing her sidearm. She didn't think it would do much, but it wasn't about the gun. It was about sending a message. "Hayes!" she shouted into her comms. "I need a full counteroffensive in the northern corridor, now! Prepare everything we've got. I don't care what it takes." "I'm on it," Hayes responded, his voice thick with grit. Sarah watched as the Xal'gar war machine lumbered closer. It was like the arrival of a storm. It was unstoppable, but that was the thing about storms, they always passed. The seconds felt like hours. Sarah's breath was steady, her gaze locked on the creature. She didn't blink. It was close now. Too close. Without thinking, she sprinted toward the war machine, her mind calculating the angles, the weaknesses. The guns she carried wouldn't be enough. But what if it wasn't the guns that mattered? She reached a maintenance hatch beside the beast, rolled inside, and activated the explosive charges stored there. A quick press of a button, and the countdown began. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she didn't wait to watch it. She was already moving. The explosion shook the station, sending a deafening roar through the corridors. The war machine was gone. It had been shredded in seconds. But the fight wasn't over. "Sarah! The fleet signal's active. I'm sending it now." Calder's voice came through her comms, heavy with relief. "Then let's make sure they hear us," Sarah said, her voice colder than ice. She moved quickly to the central control room, where the resistance had rallied. The soldiers had done their part, holding the line, pushing back, even as they took casualties. Sarah glanced around the room. Every face was grim, every hand shaking, but their resolve was unbroken. "We've got the signal," Sarah said, her voice commanding. "The fleet's coming. But they won't make it in time unless we hold this position." The soldiers nodded, weapons at the ready. They understood what that meant. There was no going back now. They would either die here or survive. The Xal'gar were relentless, but humanity had something they didn't. Hope. And in the end, that could be enough. #cliffhanger ending asterisk. The deep rumble of incoming fire sounded once more, but this time, it wasn't from the Xal'gar. The sky outside the station's windows flared with the light of hundreds of ships descending. Humanity's fleet was here. The tide was about to turn. But Sarah knew there was one last battle ahead. And this one would be unlike any they had faced before. The sky above Cradle Station burned with the light of hundreds of ships descending from the blackness of space. Humanity's fleet had arrived. But even as the massive ships broke through the atmosphere and into view, Sarah Quinn couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that it was already too late. Her pulse hammered in her throat as she surveyed the battlefield from the command center. The Xal'gar, relentless as ever, were already rallying their forces. Their ground troops dug into the station's defenses with terrifying precision. The clock was ticking. "They're coming from all directions, Commander. We're being overrun." Sergeant Hayes's voice crackled through her comm, strained but steady. "We've got a small window before the fleet's firepower is in position to help." Sarah exhaled sharply. The plan had been simple: hold the station long enough for the fleet to arrive and deliver a crushing blow to the Xal'gar. The fleet was here, but the station's defenses were crumbling faster than expected. Their time was running out. She snapped her fingers, turning back to her team. "We can't afford to lose ground. We're going to give them hell." Sarah looked over the faces of her remaining soldiers, tired, bloodied, but unbroken. These were the men and women who had seen their homes fall, their families ripped from them, and their entire species driven to the edge of extinction. And yet, here they were, standing in the shadows of defeat, still ready to fight. "Hayes, prep the anti-tank mines. We need to slow them down long enough to get the fire support into position." "On it, Commander." Hayes's voice was clipped, determined. He moved quickly to coordinate with his team, setting up the defenses. "Calder," Sarah said, turning to the communications officer. "How long until the fleet can get its heavy guns on target?" 15 minutes, Calder answered. But their incoming is fierce. I don't think we can hold for that long without reinforcements. Sarah's jaw clenched. The fleet's firepower was their last hope, but it was a long shot. She knew they needed more time than that. And time, as always, was in short supply. She looked at the map display on the wall, which showed the spread of enemy forces across the station. The Xal'gar were efficient in their slaughter. The station's northern section was completely overwhelmed, and the southern flank wasn't far behind. There was only one way to survive this: force the Xal'gar into a choke point and make them bleed. Move the men to the southern entrance. We're going to trap them there, Sarah ordered. A soldier, Private Jacobs, stepped forward, his face pale but resolute. Commander, we'll fight with you. But if we don't stop them here, it's over for all of us. I know, Sarah replied, her voice low. But we're still breathing. That's more than they ever counted on. The countdown had begun. The southern entrance was now their battleground. The Xal'gar were pushing hard, intent on breaching the last few strongholds humanity had left. It was up to Sarah and her soldiers to make the final stand. The first wave came like a storm, alien warriors, towering in their black exoskeletons, charging through the station's corridors with a terrifying speed. Sarah's hand never left her sidearm as she barked orders, each movement a calculated step in the dance of war. Fire! She shouted. The corridor erupted in fire and smoke. The soldiers fired with precision, and the Xal'gar began to fall, but there were too many. The enemy pushed forward, unfazed by the casualties, their movements calculated and cold. Get to cover! Sarah yelled as the Xal'gar countered with their own fire, a deadly wave of plasma rounds filling the air. The resistance soldiers fought with everything they had. They moved with the fluidity of people who had lost everything but still had the will to survive. But even Sarah could feel the weight of their dwindling numbers. A sudden explosion rocked the station, sending debris flying. Sarah ducked behind a steel pillar, instinctively covering her head. She heard the sounds of her soldiers shouting orders, trying to maintain a foothold, but the Xal'gar had the advantage in numbers. Commander, they've breached the outer defenses. Calder's voice rang through her calm. The fleet's fire support is in range, but we're taking casualties. You need to hold that position now. Sarah's eyes narrowed. This was it. The moment of truth. Hayes, hold that line. We don't give an inch. Understood, Commander. Hayes's voice was filled with grit, but Sarah could hear the strain in his tone. The Xal'gar weren't just coming for victory, they were coming to annihilate. As she prepared to move again, a figure appeared through the smoke. It was Darnell, or what was left of him. His body was mangled, his once proud uniform now a mockery of the man he had been. But his eyes, those eyes, still carried the same hatred they had before his betrayal. Darnell? Sarah's voice cracked, disbelief spreading through her chest. The thing that wore his face stared at her with cold, alien eyes, its body jerking unnaturally. You thought you could defeat us, human? Your kind will never win. You are nothing. He raised his weapon, aiming directly at Sarah. The plasma bolt shot toward her, but she was faster. She dove to the side, rolling into cover behind an overturned crate. The moment of hesitation in the creature's movement told her all she needed to know. It wasn't entirely in control. She drew her weapon and fired. The shot struck Darnell's chest, and the alien inside him jerked backward, his form crumpling to the ground. Sarah's heart clenched, but she didn't have time to mourn. She didn't have the luxury. The fleet is in range. Calder's voice came through the calm, louder now. All fire support is online. We're targeting the Xal'gar main ship. Sarah didn't wait for confirmation. She pushed forward, leading the charge as the first salvo of heavy artillery slammed into the Xal'gar warships. The explosion lit up the sky beyond the station, sending shockwaves through the remaining enemy forces. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a beginning. As the Xal'gar reeled from the onslaught, Sarah's heart raced, but the battle was far from over. There were still too many, and the station's defenses were too damaged to withstand another push. But humanity had something the Xal'gar had overlooked: The ability to adapt, to fight with everything they had left. The fight wasn't over. But as the fleet began to push through the atmosphere and the remaining Xal'gar forces faltered, Sarah knew one thing for sure: humanity's fight for survival was far from done, but the first victory had been theirs. #### twist ending asterisk. Just as Sarah was about to turn back to the command center, a voice came through her calm, cold, and mechanical. "This isn't over, Commander Quinn. You've only delayed the inevitable." The voice wasn't human. It was the Xal'gar commander's honor. The enemy had a backup plan. And now, the true war was about to begin.